Hello everyone, this is the video presentation and also a final requirement in E101. These are the three main topics that we will discuss: the link between language and culture, language and society, and lastly, culture and society. But before we start our discussion, let us introduce ourselves. I am John of Emma Pakpak, and I will be the one to discuss the first topic, which is language and culture.
Hi, my name is Mark Angelo Pebrero, and I am the one who will discuss about the language and society.
And I am Lensley Sagid, and I will be the one to discuss the last topic, which is culture and society.
And here are our main objectives for today's video discussion. First is to thoroughly discuss the links between language and culture, language and society, and culture and society. The second is to understand how important language, culture, and society are to the life of an individual. For our introduction, I am going to define what is language, culture, and society. So, what is language? Language is a system of communication used by a particular country or community. Language is a system of traditional spoken, manual, or written symbols through which humans express themselves as members of a social group and participants in its culture. Language functions include communication, identity expression, play, imaginative expression, and emotional release. So, what is culture? Culture is a broad and varied phrase that refers to a wide range of primarily intangible aspects of social life. Sociologists describe culture as the values, beliefs, systems of language, communication, and behaviors that people share and that may be used to characterize them as a group. Material things shared by a group or community are also considered part of culture. Culture is separate from social structure and economic components of society, yet it is inextricably linked to both informing and being informed by them. And what is society? Society is a group of people with common territory, interaction, and culture. Society is made up of individuals who have agreed to work together for mutual benefit. It may be a very wide phrase, as we can generalize about what the entire Western civilization believes, or it can be quite restricted, characterizing simply a tiny number of people inside a certain community. However, regardless of size or the connection that links a society together, whether religious, geographical, professional, or economic society, is molded by the relationships between individuals. Let's now proceed in the discussion. The first topic is the link between language and culture. Sometimes we are confused about what is the relationship between language and culture. So I am going to enlighten you with this discussion. Our first subtopic for this is what is the relationship between language and culture. Language and culture have a complicated and overlapping relationship. Language and culture are intricately linked. They have evolved together, influencing one another in the process, ultimately shaping what it means to be human. According to A.L. Kroeber, 1923, he stated in this regard that culture then began when speech was present, and from then on, the enrichment of either meant the further growth of the other. So we can see that language and culture really have a relationship with each other. because just like what others said, we learn different languages because of the culture that we have, because of the culture that other people have that we can adopt. And according to Russell Lundy, 1973, the totality of the messages we exchange with one another while speaking a given language constitutes a speech community. That is, the inter-society understood from the standpoint of speaking. He further explained that all children learn their language from their societies, and that while learning a language, they also learn their culture and develop their cognitive abilities. And when they are together, it can develop our personality in becoming an individual. The second subtopic is how language influence our perception of culture. Language can influence our perception of culture because we are communicating with the people around us to know more about their culture and how we can adopt their culture. Language is more than simply a means of communication. It is a component of culture that distinguishes it. When discussing language and culture, the saying "language is culture and culture is language" is frequently used since the two are inextricably linked. This implies that the language you use represents your ideals and ideas. According to anthropological linguist Daniel Everett, language may be regarded a cultural instrument for relating a community's beliefs and aspirations, and it is developed and molded over time by these individuals. Just for example, the Korean culture that we Filipinos adopt, especially their language that given us opportunity to properly communicate with them. With their culture, we adopt many things that we can apply in our daily life. And for the last subtopic, for language and culture, how important language and culture is. They are important because without language, we can't properly communicate with the people around us. And without culture, we can't adopt the things that other country have, especially the languages that they have, so that we can communicate to them with clear, and also we can understand them without translating it with other languages. So basically, language and culture is really important because it is part of our lives. We can't live without them. But language is really an essential component of any culture. It is how individuals interact with one another, form connections, and foster a feeling of community. Language is a crucial feature of communication, which is a fundamental component of every culture. As language evolved, distinct cultural societies used sounds to construct collective understandings. These sounds and their related meanings grew ubiquitous throughout time, and language was established. Intercultural communication is a symbolic process that constructs, maintains, repairs, and transforms social reality. As people with diverse cultural backgrounds communicate, one of the most challenging hurdles they confront is that of language. That's all for the discussion in language and culture.
So, a quick discussion about the social linguistic. It is the relationship between the language system and the speaking in the social and cultural context. Study of the structure and use of language as it relates to its social setting. And in language and society, language has the social function. It helps us to establish and maintain relationship, convey information about the speaker. So, about in the language and speaker, user of the same language, in a sense, all speak differently. The kind of language each of them chooses to use in its part determined by his social background. Language in its turn reveals information about its speaker. So, to some extent, language, especially the structure of its lexicon, reflects the physical environment of a society. So, we have called the hypothesis by Edward Sapir or Benjamin Lee Whorf. It's called Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. So, in this, we have some importance about the hypothesis. The first is language and its culture intrinsically linked. So, it means that you are linked by its language. And the second is language is a guide to social reality. It powerfully conditions all our thinking about social problems and processes. So about the language reflects society, we have some points that we should know. Like, to some extent, language, especially to the structure of its lexicon, reflects society or reflects the social environment of a society. Like, for example, a society's kinship system is generally reflected in its kinship vocabulary. Like, language determines thought, whereas English, for example, has only one word for snow, or two if we include slit. Eskimo has several. The reason for this are obvious. It is essential for Eskimos to be able to distinguish efficiently between different types of snow. English, of course, is quite able to make the same distinction. Fine snow, dry snow, soft snow, and so on. But in Eskimos, this sort of distinction is lexicalized, made by means of individual words, because snow is the most common thing in culture of Eskimos. Then next mo, kaya mo naman siguro ikato. So, about the society changes language, it have also the points that we also should know. Like, a society is reflected in language. In this way, social change can produce by or a corresponding linguistic change. This has happened in the case of Russian during the period of 1860 to the present day. The structure of the Russian kinship system has undergone a very radical change as a result of several important events. Like, actually, I'm going to give you some example. So the example is the emancipation of serf in 1861, the First World War, the Revolution, the collectivization of agriculture, and the Second World War. There has been a marked social as well as political revolution, and this has been accompanied by a corresponding change in the language. So, in the last century, most Russians live in a large patriarchal extended family household. Brothers, wives, and the time part of the family now normally live in a different household. Similarly, the term yatrub signifies husband's brother's wife, has now disappeared entirely. We have the important terms in the social linguistics. We have the speech community, language varieties, regional dialects, social dialects, in dialect, diglossia, we have style, context, and register. So, let's go for a speech community. So, what is speech community? A speech community is defined as a group of people who from a community and share the same language or a particular variety of language. So, the next is characteristic of language community or the speech community. We have they speak the same language or dialect. The members of the group must interact linguistically with another members of the community. And the third one is they may share similar attitude towards linguistic norms. So in the speech variety, so as we all know that as language variety refers to any distinguishable form of language used by the speaker or group of speakers. The distinctive characteristic of the speech variety are mainly reflected to its pronunciation, syntax, and vocabulary. Speech variety is a neutral term which is often used to replace the such term as standard language, dialect, pidgin, and Creole. So, in language varieties, in people who claim to be a user of the same language to do not speak the language in the same manner. For example, all the English-speaking people do not speak the same type of English, and the language used by the same individual varies as circumstances vary. We have the language varieties in people who claim to be user of the same language to do not speak the language in the same manner. For example, all the English-speaking people do not speak the same type of English, and we can notice that. And the language used by the same individual varies as circumstances vary. We have dialectal varieties. The first one is regional dialects. The second one is social dialects. The functional varieties are style and register. So let's move on at dialectal varieties. The first one is regional varieties. Regional dialects are linguistic varieties used by people living in different regions. For example, in North, they say like, you need your hair cutting, but in South, you need your hair cut. You see the difference. Another example, in English, it needs washing, but in Scottish, it needs wash. So you can see the difference. So in regional dialect, boundaries often coincidence with geographical barriers such as mountains, rivers, or swamps. This differentiation is accounted for by the lack of communication in the old days when travel was difficult. We have another is social dialects. Just as regional dialect is associated with separation caused by physical condition, social dialect has to do with separation brought about different social condition. In social class dialect or in sociolect refers to the linguistic variety characteristic of the particular social class. So, in social dialect, just a regional dialect is associated with separation caused by physical condition. Social dialect has to do with separation brought about by different social condition. Social class dialect or sociolect refers to the linguistic variety characteristic a particular social class. We have the variables of social dialect. A dialect or variety based purely on societal norms is known as social variety of a language or a dialect. We have social class, education, ethnicity or race, age, religion, and gender. About the language and sex, we always fighting about it. We have the difference between women and men have been always a topic of interest to human species, and supposed linguistic differences are often enshrined in proverbs, in style, context, and in register. Register is occupational style, a jargon which a group of specialists develop to talk about their specialty. Journalists, legalists, sport commenters, and about in dialect, language user move around in the variety space defined by these three dimensions. So another about the in dialect, language user move around in the variety space defined by these three dimensions, and the territory in variety space which is covered by a single user is known as in dialect. So the last is diglossia, speech communities in which two or more varieties of the same language are used by some speakers under different conditions, like for example, classic Arabic of the Quran and diverse of local forms of Arabic like Java or Javanese and Bahasa Indonesia. So as a recap about my presentation or as a report, we discussed about the social linguistic language and society, the language speaker, the hypothesis by Benjamin or the Spearworth, and the language reflects society, the society changes language, the important terms in the social linguistics. So those are the topics that I've been discussed. Thank you.
So for now, I will be discussing the link between culture and society. So first, what is culture? Culture encompasses human elements beyond biology. For example, our norms and values, the stories we tell, learned or acquired behaviors, religious beliefs, art and fashion, and so on. Culture is what differentiates one group or society from the next. So, culture comprises both intangible aspects such as beliefs, ideas, and values, which form the content of culture, and tangible aspects, these objects, symbols, or technology, which represents that content. So next, what is society? Society is the sum of social relationships among groups of humans or animals, a structured community of people bound together by similar traditions, institutions, or nationality, the customs of a community, and the way it is organized. So, what is the difference between culture and society? So, different societies have different cultures. However, it is important not to confuse the idea of culture with society. A culture represents the beliefs and practices of a group, while society represents the people who share those beliefs and practices. Neither society nor culture could exist without the other. So, what is the relationship between culture and society? So, culture and society are intricately related. A culture consists of the objects of a society, whereas a society consists of the people who share a common culture. When the terms culture and society first acquired their current meanings, most people in the world work and live in small groups in the same locale. So now, let us proceed to the first three main subtopics. First, we have the cultural diversity. The diversity of human behavior, practices, and cultural beliefs forms are so remarkable in a society. Acceptable forms of behavior vary widely from culture to culture and often contrast dramatically with what people from Western societies consider normal. So next, we have the concept of culture. And this type of culture are not found a variety of differences. We have the monoculture structure is founded generally in small societies, but some modern societies such as Japan have remained fairly monocultural and are marked by high levels of cultural homogeneity. Next, we have the subculture that do not refer just only ethnic or linguistic groups within a large society. They concern any segments of population which are distinguishable from the rest of society by their cultural patterns. So last, we have the ethnocentrism. Every culture has its own unique patterns of behavior which seem alien to people from other cultural backgrounds. So now let's proceed to the functions of culture. First, we have culture-defined situations. Culture conditions determines what we eat, what we drink, what we wear, and what work we do. Second, culture is treasure of knowledge. Culture provided knowledge which is important for the physical, social, and intellectual existence of a man. So last, we have the culture varies from society to society. Culture of everything society is unique to itself. No culture very remains constant, it varies from time to time. So let's move on to the second main three subtopics. So first, we have the characteristics of culture. The first one is culture is shared. People living together in a society share culture. For example, almost all people living in the Philippines share Filipino language, dress in similar styles, eat many of the same foods, and celebrate many of the same holidays. Second, we have the culture is learned. People are not born with culture, they need to learn it. In all human societies, children learn culture from adults. Anthropologists call this process of enculturation or cultural transmission. So we have the culture is symbolic. People have culture primarily because they can communicate with and understand symbols. Symbols allow people to develop complex thoughts. So next we have the culture is integrated. In order to keep the culture functioning, all aspects of culture must be integrated. For example, the language must be able to describe all the functions within the culture in order for ideas to be transmitted from one person to another. So, how does culture influence language? So, culture influences the language that is spoken within its constraints as a society, such as how certain words are used in support of the culture. It's through language that members of a specific culture communicate with each other and create bonds with each other. So, what is the influence of culture in our society? So, our culture shapes the way we work and play, and it makes a difference in how we view ourselves and others. It affects our values, what we consider right and wrong. So, this is how the society we live in influence our choices. But our choices can also influence others and ultimately help shape our society. To the last three main topics, we have the types of culture. The material culture refers to the physical objects and resources people use to define their culture. Physical aspects of a culture help to define its members' behavior and perceptions, while the non-material culture includes creations and abstract ideas that are not embodied in physical objects. So we also have the components of culture. Symbols and language. Symbols are acts that have come to be socially accepted as standing for some particular thing. We also have the values. It differs from society to society, as every social order chooses to be valued and what not. They are standards that people use to decide what is desirable. Norms. These are social rules which dictates correct and appropriate behavior in the society. It also tells us what we must do and what we must not do. We also have the Functions of culture. So, culture makes a human being out of a biological organism. It provides us guidelines for day-to-day living, and cultures ensure a stable social order. So last, to generalize it, in addition to its intrinsic value, culture provides important social and economic benefits, with improved learning and health, increased tolerance and opportunities to come together with others. Culture enhances our quality of life and increases overall well-being for both individuals and communities. So culture plays an essential role in the life of a person and society. It acts as a means of accumulation, storage, and transmission of human experience. It is a culture that shapes people into who they are as they gain knowledge, learn the language, symbols, values, norms, customs, and traditions.
So in the conclusion of language and culture, language and society, and the culture and the society are really important, especially to all the children who are just acquiring and learning different languages and the culture they might adapt to because of their society. They really have a link with each other because without any of them, language will be nothing. And language will be lonely if culture and society are not there. And just like what we hear from others, languages are culture, and culture is language. All these three topics that we discussed are really important, especially to all of us individuals, because without them, we can communicate each other, we can understand the things we want to say, and we can practice or we can have any benefits or beliefs that we have today. So all in all, these three topics have a link together and they are really important to all of us. Thank you. And we are the reporters of these topics. And now, thank you.